So forgive me for my Arabic, but ahlan wa sahlan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you on and be discussing this crisis that's going on in Lebanon. And before we start, I wanted to introduce you to the viewers that will watch this. So for those watching or who will be watching, Dr. Rabi Mohtar is the Dean of the Faculty of Agricultural and Food Sciences at the American University of Beirut. Dr. Mohtar was the founding executive director of the Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute, the founder and lead of the Water Energy Food Nexus Initiative at Texas A&M, and an advisor to the Energy Institute. He has also co-founded the Division of Environmental and Ecological Engineering at Purdue University and served on the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Water Security and Climate Change, among many other initiatives. It is my pleasure to be interviewing you today and diving into the food and agriculture crisis that Lebanon is facing.
Thank you, Theodora, very much for the kind introduction. Thank you.
So just to get started right away. So my first question, is clearly the financial crisis and the port blast have exposed an already present and existent weaknesses in Lebanon's agricultural system, which is very alarming. We see reports of mothers bartering on Facebook for food and astronomical prices for basic ingredients. Could you discuss why Lebanon's food system was not strong enough to withstand these crises to begin with?
Thank you, Theodora, and thank you for all those watching. I hope this session would shed some light on what happened over the last several months in Lebanon. Similar to many economic bubbles, Lebanon was living in a bubble. The economic financial system was not healthy. Nobody knew it. Some people knew it. But this it's a lot of things that led to where we are today. The economic meltdown of the country really left many people with their inability to have access to the dollar is what everybody used to use here. In fact, even at you go with a taxi driver, what we call service, where you share a ride with 3 or 4 others, you pay them dollar. So dollar was the currency where everybody uses in Lebanon. And right after the economic crisis, which really topped down with the political crisis and the most recently, the blast, it really made things kind of very clear that we had no buffer in terms of our security. And food security is among those top securities that we are, or food insecurity is among the top insecurities we're living here in Lebanon. The simple reality is the majority of our food basket is imported. And we don't produce much of our food, even though at some point in our past, our history, we did produce our food. But currently, most of the food supply, most of the food we consume on a daily basis is coming from abroad. And that requires dollar for importation, which was lacking. We produce very little of our food basket. So the combination of as of maybe a month ago, 50% of Lebanese are unemployed. Many of those who are employed are earning half of their salaries. With the degradation of the Lebanese lira, you're now earning less than 1/5, 1/6 of what you used to earn, even if you're earning your full salary. So, and you have to pay for hard currency for the import, and you're not producing domestically. All of those really exposed Lebanon to a disaster that we haven't seen in this country since its existence. So food is among those top things. Just as a reference, if you're living in any normal country outside the region, you pay few percentage of your salary on food. Depending on where you are, you could pay maybe up to 8-10% of your income on food. Families in Lebanon today are barely making enough, many of them, not all of them, many of them are barely making enough income only to pay for food, let alone shelter. And now we're heading into winter. winterization and fuel and clothing and rental and telephones and electricity and all of that. That's what you're dealing with at the moment. It's all that complexity of things on top of the food insecurity.
It's very pressing, and also on top of this pandemic that everyone is experiencing right
Yeah.
now, that only compounds the severity of it.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned food insecurity, and so quickly, if you wouldn't mind just defining what.
Come closer, Theodora. Come closer to the microphone.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Better.
Okay. I think my paper was covering the. And so you mentioned food insecurity, and so if you could quickly explain for people watching what that means to be food insecure, and also, do you think that it is feasible for Lebanon to become self-sufficient and food secure with respect to its food supply in the timely manner that it needs to happen?
Yeah. Very interesting question. Let me dissect it into pieces. So when we talk about food insecurity, I'd like to talk about nutritional security, because you could be malnutrition is not only not having enough food, but not having enough of the good nutrition. So there's a nutritional security, there's access to food, and there's availability of food.
Mm-hmm.
As of now, Lebanon does not have a problem with availability of food. Lebanese are entrepreneurs. You've got a healthy, so far, trade system. You go to the supermarkets, you find anything you want. The question is how much access normal family have access to that food, and the kind of the hidden big elephant in that room when it comes to food security is nutrition security. If you are a family trying to feed your children with proper nutritional food, today you cannot afford the same diet menu that you used to afford 6 months ago because of the inaccess of healthy protein. So these are three separate things that I'd like to really separate them and not talk about them in one bulk. So the access to food, which has to do with availability. Availability is not the issue because of import, healthy trade system, and nutrition, which is very, very important. We have a lot of evidence today to really realize that many families are not getting enough nutrition because they're eating the healthy food, but they're eating what they can afford to buy. Other element of the question is also very interesting, is about can we produce that locally? Wasn't that your question?
If it's feasible to be self-sufficient, and so not to rely so much on the imports.
So the self-sufficiency is a very tricky question. I'm going to link it back to food security in a minute. Today, our food basket, the Lebanese Mediterranean diet, if you look at the traditional Mediterranean diet, and you're very familiar with that, we don't consume a lot of meat. We don't consume a lot of red meat. Much of our protein is coming from plant-based protein, coming from legumes, from some cereal. So if you look at that for a second, it's good for you. A lot of the recent studies have really shared evidence that it's not only good for you, for your health, but it's also good for the environment. That kind of diet uses less water, it uses less resources, less footprint than a red meat diet. And it's good for your health to really have bulk of your protein coming from plant-based. So if I look at the traditional Mediterranean Lebanese diet, we have recently, I would exclude this past year because it has been a disaster for the country. If I exclude it, we have deviated significantly from that diet. Meat was accessible. Many people consume meat, even though much of that meat is coming from outside Lebanon. So today, I cannot have a self-sufficiency with the same diet I had a year ago. There has to be hard choices in terms of looking back at the diet, the traditional diet we used to have, and assessing how much of that diet can be produced locally. So I mentioned there is a difference between self-sufficiency and food security. Part of our diet, we have rice, we have wheat. Rice and wheat are not necessarily economically profitable or feasible for us to really consume or plant all of our needs. But if you look at the bulk of the food basket, and with some tweaking and some policy and some enforcement to that policy, Lebanon can today satisfy big part of its food need in terms of that basic diet, looking at lentils, looking at beans, looking at the dairy and fruits and vegetables. We could do the bulk of that using local resources that are sustainable and that uses its own land, it uses its own water resources. I have a question today about our diet that constitutes rice, for example. Rice, for the last many years, has been part of the Lebanese diet. We cannot produce rice for obvious reasons. We don't have the weather, but we don't have also the water. And I do question the wisdom of having self-sufficiency in wheat. I think this needs to be studied with a planning in terms of what resources we have, what are the trade-offs in terms of, do I plant other commodities beside wheat that may be able to satisfy my food basket, but also can generate income to families and to contribute to the economy of the country.
Definitely. And that leads me to, that made me think of another question. Because you talk about the economy of Lebanon and being self-sufficient and the profitability of different crops. And you also mentioned how the Lebanese are extremely smart people and very entrepreneurial. Do you think that an overhaul of the Lebanese agricultural system could revitalize the Lebanese economy? And if so, how? Like, how could how can revitalizing it, lead to greater economic returns for the people?
Thank you. Very interesting question, and many of us have been looking at that as we speak. The short answer is yes. Despite what the most recent trends has been for the last 30 years, 40 years, this country, the base of this country is agriculture. And for many reasons, agriculture has not been in the priority for any of the administration that governed this country for many, many years. So agriculture has not been part of the GDP of this country. But let me make a point here about when I define agriculture, I define a broad array of economies that goes into not only the food production, but it goes into ecotourism, that goes into the national heritage we have, preserving our environment, the biodiversity. So it's a broader than the 4% GDP that economists would look at. If I look at this inclusive heritage, whether it's a national heritage for biodiversity or for culture or for the traditional food, I do believe there's an opportunity there for Lebanon to contribute or to have a significant portion of its GDP coming from that agriculture, broader definition of agriculture, the food and agriculture system, can contribute significantly. Now, what does it take? That's the question. What does it take? Do I plant it with wheat? Would I plant it with citrus and bananas? Or I look at the niche areas in which Lebanon can make its own niche areas in terms of production, or I look at the trade-offs between nutrition, between financial return, water use, land use mapping, environmental footprint. I think there need to be a larger platform that allow the planning ministry, not the agriculture ministry, because we're going to come back probably to a stage where I've said that more than once, that food security is not an agricultural problem. It's a national security. It touches many other disciplines and many other groups. So it's not only for the agriculture sector to really discuss the food security. So that planning is not only the Ministry of Agriculture planning, it's the Ministry of Water, it's the Ministry of Planning, it's at the Prime Minister's level in our political system that needs to have this as a priority for the country moving forward. Until that happens, we're not going to create an agriculture-based economy or a food and agriculture system-based economy.
Yeah, it's a societal problem. As you said, it's not just an agricultural problem. It needs collaboration and different actors in the society to work together. And
Absolutely.
And so do you think, given it sounds to me like obviously agriculture has not been at the forefront of the planning of the Lebanese government. Have you noticed, or has it been made apparent that given the tragedies of the last year between the financial crisis, COVID, and the blast that happened, that the government has put this on their agenda, or has it remained on the back burner?
We haven't had a government we've been in interim governments for many months. So I don't know the answer to this question. I hope that the disaster after the other that Lebanon has seen over the last many months will be a wake-up call for the future of governments to really realize that the bulk of this country is agriculture. The bulk of the labor in this country is agriculture, and agriculture is not only a place to preserve a small minority of its population, but it's a place where the economy can be based on that system, food and agriculture system. And I do believe that this is where a close coordination and a close collaboration between the academic sector, which I represent, where I'm one of those members of that academic community, the public sector and the private sector needs to work together to really make those visions and ideas see light. I truly believe that agriculture can be a major pillar to the economy for this sector. There is a technology, there's the new technologies that we need to enable that sector. I don't think we can afford going back in history and look at what our ancestors used to farm these lands. I think we need to look at the digital technologies, we need to look at systems, sensors, big data, that really opens up the eyes of the entire community about a treasure to preserve and to enhance and to create jobs in this area. I believe this is the future for this country and the region.
Yeah, I hope so as well. And I think there's so much potential there as well. And it also seems to me, there is sort of this ground zero, this ability to start from scratch a little bit here, and there's potential to do everything.
Yeah.
One thing that comes to mind thinking of, starting from scratch is, obviously in the US, our agricultural system is very industrialized and it's not healthy for the environment. And so do you view this as an opportunity for, farming that is more conscious of the environment and is regenerative in some sense, or, doesn't utilize the same industrial practices that the US does or other major countries? Or do you think that farmers in Lebanon will, utilize these traditional practices because they might yield greater crop returns in the immediate future?
Very good question. I would hope that the regenerative agriculture, the renewable agriculture, would have a place in the future of this country's food and agriculture system. It does take a policy. It does take some visionary policymakers and a enforcement to these policies that will incentivize good practices. But let me stop here for a second and make a statement that probably there is a misperception about this in the media, that good, sound, environmentally responsible practices are not profitable. I think you can be profitable while being respectful to human health and ecosystem health. Solutions are there. We need to really change and challenge current practices and convince the future farmers the future producers, that you don't need to choose between your pocket, your bottom line, and the environment. I think there are many solutions that preserve the environment, that are respectful to the environment and the ecosystem, and at the same time does not penalize your bottom line.
I agree 100%.
And here also, I'd like to make a plea to the young generation, to those who are aware of the climate change issues. I mean, by the way, not many people may realize that COVID is at the interface between agriculture and human. Mm-hmm. Many of viruses that we have seen over the last many years are at the interface between our farming system and our human activity. So I think this is at the core of what we're facing today. So my plea to the young generation that they need to be involved in agriculture, in the food and agriculture system, because that is their future. Mm-hmm. The future of the system, the future of their health and the ecosystem health lies on how we produce food. We need to look at out-of-the-box solutions and models for a business model for the agriculture and food system. That business model is not an easy model because the earlier model was based on profitability. Now we're looking at a much inclusive model that looks at profitability, that looks at our health as human health, the ecosystem health, also that is holistic in nature. It's not a trivial system, it's a challenging system. It needs young, bright minds that are going to be engaged in this. And it's a plea to those young people to be involved. Agriculture is not a profession of the past. Agriculture and food system is the profession for the future. Mm-hmm. This is where we need the electrical engineers, we need the policymakers, the anthropologists, the economists, the mechanical engineers, the scientists abroad, the challengers, the artists, the communicators. We need all of those to really together co-design the food and agriculture system of the future that respects the ecosystem, that respects our health, that will unlock all of that potential, not only for Lebanon, but for the world.
Yeah, and I 100% agree, and I think that's a great message to send out, because just going off of that, profitability and health doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. They can coexist together. And I think that a lot of people, and young people especially, they don't see themselves as part of the food system. They see themselves as just benefiting from it, or in the case of right now, people like in Lebanon, as suffering from it because of the way that the lack of organization. So I think that's a great message to give to people to get involved with it. And I know we only have a few minutes left.
Let me put the light on. I need to put the light on. It's not the ideal light, but it's better than it was. Sorry.
It's good. No, it's perfect. I know we only have a few minutes left. I have so many things that I want to ask you, but I'll narrow it down to maybe 2 more questions if we can fit it in. So obviously you're the Dean of the Faculty of Agricultural and Food Sciences at AUB. And so I wanted to give you a moment also to discuss, what are you working on, or what is AUB doing during this time to help Lebanon in the food and agricultural sector?
We are in an unusual situation. As a university, we're about teaching, learning, research, and we do some engagement activity with the community. But this unusual year had actually allowed us to do more. So we've created units that help newcomers to the food and agriculture system who do not know how to farm, who do not know how to produce. We're working with these individuals to really guide them into what does it take to have a production farm. We've been on the ground working with many international organizations, UN, international organizations, and others that enables local production, taking local farmers, taking those, what we call mooni box. A mooni in Arabic term is a traditional term that refers to food items that you can preserve. So this is the time, as we speak, this is the time of the year where you prepare that mooni that can last you for the summer month, for the winter month, sorry. And we're working with local producers that allow that local women, children, working on a mooni box, buy it from them and give it to communities in need. So we've been working beyond our traditional extension, research and learning. We're working with community, engaging communities to preserve, to revitalize that sector. And I think this is something we're excited about. We have new partners in this, and we're also working with private sector companies that entice them to invest in agriculture. And I think this is something I hope will continue. I hope that this is not only a short-term interest that's triggered by the crisis, but I hope that this is something that will stay with investment in this area.
I hope so too, and investment is definitely needed. There's not enough investment in the agricultural sector, not nearly enough for what we'll need as our population continues to grow as well. And I know you have to go to another meeting, but I wanted to leave you with one last question. For those of us who aren't in Lebanon and this might be a difficult question to answer, how can people on the outside help? Is there anything that we can do to help the communities of Lebanon?
Many ways. There are many local NGOs who are working on the ground. I mean, right before I got to school, I was with a US-based agency foundation that's using our contact, our network at AUB to distribute food and shelter, winterization material, blankets, and fuel for the winter for many families. So there are many NGOs on the ground working on this that you can really engage with. I don't want to promote any, but certainly AUB has a platform. We'll be happy to share those with you at a later time, but we have several activities. Our faculty, the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Sciences, has also some of these platforms that support ground-based local communities in this. But I would say more than that. I would say the biggest help is to really promote the suffering, make the suffering of the and the global community really can put more pressure on whatever, on for a government formation, for a political reform, more importantly, for transparency as moving down the future. There's a lot of corruption in this country, and I hope that with the help of the international community, we will be able to reach a stage where transparency would be promoted and corruption not be tolerated. The people in this country has seen enough of this suffering, and I look forward for for a new page to be turned, and you see a new Lebanon that all the Lebanese people are seeking.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope that this interview can be a conversation starter for people in the global community and will entice them and interest them to get more involved and continue this discussion, because it is so important and so vital, because you can't do anything without talking about it, without getting people on board and educating them. So I really hope that this can be a starting point for that. And I have so many more questions for you on this. But
maybe do another session.
Yes.
Theodora, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for the right-on questions, and I hope this was useful.
Yes, 100%. It was definitely useful, and thank you. It was also a pleasure for me to speak with you and learn from you and be able to share your insights with people.
Thank you all those who watched, and please stay in touch.
I will. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.